And the obvious first question there is we have our natural fructose in things like fruit, and then we have our high fructose corn syrup. So when we say fructose, are we talking about all fructose or keeping it under a certain limit, sticking with the natural forms? How do you look at that?
Well, it's all fructose. Fructose is fructose. So it's very similar to glucose. It's got the same number of atoms in it. They're just structured slightly differently. And we know a lot about glucose metabolism because it's been studied for hundreds of years or 100 years. But our understanding of the metabolism of fructose only actually came definitively described by Luc Tappy, who's a Swiss guy, in 2011. So it's brand new, the information around it. We've sort of had some understanding over the last 30 or 40 years, but my textbooks, which are, 40 years old, 35, 40 years old, actually barely scratch the surface of fructose metabolism. And even the current textbooks, which are taught to medical students, barely touch upon it. So fructose is completely and utterly metabolized differently to glucose. And so sugar, the sugar molecule is half glucose, half fructose. Whether or not you get that fructose from high fructose corn syrup, or you get it from honey, or you get it from fruit, it's all exactly the same molecule. So, and again, I'll put it in summary, and then I'll break it down back into the natural and the formulated one. So the fructose, in summary, is a small amounts converted to glycogen, which goes to restores muscle. The vast majority of it is metabolized in the liver on first pass. So the body doesn't like it getting from the gut into the bloodstream. It goes from the gut straight to the liver, metabolized very, very quickly. A small amount's metabolized in the mesentery of the gut, small amount in the testes. And there's some new work coming out suggesting it may be metabolized slightly differently in a few other structures, but effectively most of it goes straight to the liver, metabolized there. Small amount goes down an aldehyde pathway, which gets converted, which is effectively an alcohol pathway. I've got some diagrams of this in my talks. So, okay, you eat fructose, a small amount's going to get turned into as a glass of red wine, but that is an alcohol pathway. Too much, and that's how we make alcohol. You ferment fruit, and it's the fermentation of the fructose gets converted to the alcohol. Whether or not you have that in a glass of red wine or you have it in your liver doesn't really matter. It's the same pathway. Another portion goes towards uric acid production. There's an enormous amount of work about uric acid. Uric acid is a byproduct of fructose metabolism. It's the thing commonly heard of with gout, but it's a huge cornerstone in the inflammation pathway. And some of your viewers will understand about nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is, and I'm jumping between stuff, but nonetheless, it's all in diagram form in some of my other talks. Nitric oxide opens up your blood vessels to control our blood pressure. It controls the blood flow to our brain, and it controls our immunity. Uric acid inhibits nitric oxide function. So if you have too much fructose, you'll produce uric acid. Uric acid will, in fact, affect our blood pressure, affect our brain blood flow, and affects our immune system. So a lot of people nowadays have hypertension, high blood pressure. Literally, by dropping their sugar intake, they reduce their blood pressure within days. Literally, so that's the practical side of it. The practical side, cut out your sugar, your blood pressure will come down literally within days, and you'll need to come off medications or at least think about reducing it. That mechanism is via uric acid. Another pathway that fructose travels down is then into the production of fat, because the excess is converted to fat, which happens in nature. If you eat fruit as an animal and you gorge upon it, you're doing it to get fat for winter, hibernation. Again, that's it. It's a simple mechanism. In nature, fruit drives behavior, and it will go down that pathway of fat production. Some of that fat production actually then goes down in the end pathway to small, dense LDL particles. LDLs are a lipoprotein, how we transport fat and protein in the bloodstream. the current understanding is that the small, dense LDL particles, this is not the topic of cholesterol, the small, dense LDLs, when they become oxidized, and which then they're the ones which are a major association and likely cause of inflammation. So if you can actually cut down your fructose, then you cut down your small, dense LDL production, then they're not there to be oxidized, and as a result of that, you reduce your inflammation. Then there's another pathway which is actually related to our hunger. So fructose will go and inhibit leptin. And again, I'm using some terms here. Leptin's a hormone produced by the fat in our bodies. So if you've got plenty of leptin, plenty of fat on board, the body produces leptin, and it says don't eat. Fructose breaks that pathway. So it actually that's at a hypothalamic level inside the brain, and actually, so therefore fructose will make you hungry. It will also stimulate a hormone called ghrelin, which is secreted by the stomach, which is the one which actually gives you that rumbling stomach. When you're hungry, you'll get, oh, I've got a rumbly stomach. It's triggered all through the vagus nerve. And as a result of that, you then feel hungry. So fructose, wherever it comes from, will drive certain behaviors. Number one, it will make you hungry. Number two, it'll make you lethargic because of its alcohol effect. 3, it will make you agitated by the uric acid because your blood pressure will go up. You get a bit excited in that situation. And third, and then finally, it'll actually have this whole effect via the fat metabolism and fat storage. Richard Johnson is a nephrologist who studied this significantly, the role of uric acid in hibernation. And he'll actually look at, as an animal in hibernation, and I'm summarising a lot of Richard's work here in a short bit, so apologies, Richard, if you ever hear this. But if in hibernation, as you get towards the end of hibernation, you've burnt out in your fat stores, the body starts breaking down protein. One of those side effects is uric acid. Uric acid goes up, and then actually it starts agitating, and then you wake up out of hibernation to then start the cycle again. So coming full circle back to your original question, is there a difference? No. So fructose in fruit, which is the natural source of fructose is fruit and honey. Fruit in nature will drive behaviour, and you can see that in the animal kingdom. Here in Australia, we've got possums, which will literally come and strip a fruit tree bare 2 days before you actually want to eat it. And they can't possibly eat that amount of fruit, but they do. They literally gorge themselves on it because they're getting fat. But it's the fructose and the uric acid which is actually driving that pathway to actually continue on. And so animals in the wild will just eat fruit until they can't eat anymore, or they strip the tree bare. But it's a survival mechanism. Now, we as humans go down through the same pathway. So it's a very addictive pathway. It's actually, we talked about that it stimulates dopamine in the addiction center of the brain, a place called the nucleus accumbens. And again, it's just fascinating to watch. And we know our food drives behavior. I use the example, I don't know if, do your shops, your supermarkets close on Christmas Day and Easter Sunday?
On Christmas, yes.
And you watch the frenzy of shopping in the 2 days before that because people aren't going to get their food for 24 hours. It's completely irrational. But what I'm sort of saying is our food becomes a very irrational behavior. But a significant part of that is actually fructose. And so what happens, like sugar's 50% fructose, 50% glucose. Fruit, depending on the different forms, will have varying amounts of fructose and glucose, but it's roughly 50-50. Honey is about 55 to 45% glucose. That's why honey's sweeter than fruit. And high fructose corn syrup is in that same vicinity of 55-45. So again, I'll come back. If you want to eat fructose and you're an animal, and we're all animals, so we've got the same metabolism, if you want to eat it, that's fine. However, you should understand that it's going to drive behavior and it's going to have side effects. And if you want to eat fructose, understand you should be having it seasonally. When it's fresh. We can come back to what my philosophy is of eating, but if you're eating it, should be having fresh and local, and it should be seasonal. But understand it will make you hungry. So in season, I will have some berries, but I'll have them at night so that the hunger that it actually triggers for me, and when I'm saying some, I'll have 3 or 4. I'm completely addicted. But okay, I like that sweetness, but I'll have it later, in the evening, so that I sleep off the hunger. But if I have that for breakfast, then I'm going to be hungry through the course of the day. And you watch people with a bowl of grapes in front of them, or a bowl of cherries. They can't eat one. You ever seen that? People can't. You can't. If I give you a bowl of fruit, it's really hard just to have one. So I think fructose has major behavioural actions. Here's a sideline: high fructose corn syrup. Who developed that? Do you know that one?
No, I don't.
The Japanese. So the Japanese actually sold that technology to the US. The high fructose corn syrup industry took off, largely related to corn subsidies and farming issues and financial ties. But that technology was actually sent to the US. And in a really cynical sort of way, who's actually won the war now? Like, we've got a whole society in the US and large places around the world that are addicted to sugar and fructose, and that high fructose corn syrup might have actually been the weapon. Yeah. The weaponization of food. We talk about weaponization of everything, but there's a side thing.
What year was that?
That was 1950s, I think.
Okay.
That technology was around in the 1950s, and certainly then adopted by the 1960s.
And I would assume, too, it would depend on the person's goals and how metabolically healthy they are, how much they might want to introduce fruit to the diet. You mentioned having it seasonally, and you have a few berries at night periodically if they're in season. For somebody that is on the continuum of being insulin resistant or diabetic, I would say they want to stay away at that time, get metabolically healthy before they start introducing fruit if their goal is to get metabolically healthy again.
We will continue to segue, I suppose. There's a talk I did through COVID because I was bored, and that talk's called Carbohydrate, the Dose is the Poison. So we've created this scenario now where people are carbohydrate aware. And I know we're winning because here in Australia there's half a dozen different low carb beers. So Australia's a beer drinking country, and the fact that we've got low carb beers means I win. There's the market's driven behavior or driven awareness. So I thought, okay, we've said carbs are troublesome. So the long and short of it is there is no single human biochemical pathway that requires carbohydrate. So we actually require zero carbohydrate in our diet to survive. We need to have essential fats in our diet. We need to have essential proteins. We need to have essential vitamins and minerals. But there's not a single pathway that we require to eat glucose or fructose, or combinations thereof, which becomes all the galactoses and the maltoses and dextroses. But effectively, we don't actually need it. So if there's actually no pathway that we require to survive, then it becomes a luxury item. And it is a luxury item. So fruit in nature is a luxury item. If you're an animal, you come across it seasonally and you will gorge upon that luxury item so you can get fat for winter. And in society, fruit is a luxury item. Coming back to Japan, I don't know if you've ever been there. They cherish fruit. So an apple, it will be served in an entire box, and it will be extremely expensive. but it is seen as a precious special item. It's not a mass-produced, chemically chemically managed, hybridized fruit that we have now. So the fruit of history was small, tiny, wasn't nearly as sweet as it is now. And one of the reasons is we've hybridized fruit. It's been genetically modified, whether or not it's just not maybe genetically modified in the laboratory, even though certain strains are, but it is in fact now lower in fibre and higher in sugar. And it is like that because it actually drives market share, and it improves shelf life, and it improves profitability. The more sugar you have in the food, the longer it will last. Do you? I have an example in my office. I've always had a piece of bread, that's been toasted, and that piece of bread, I think, stayed there for 10 years, didn't go mouldy. But so, by way of example, you get a whole grain bread, it will start going mouldy within a few days. You get, and that's because of the amount of fibre. And if you get a white bread, then it will take longer to go mouldy. If you get a piece of, do you have raisin bread or fruit bread?
We do.
Yeah, so that will stay ages before it goes mouldy. And then you take the extreme example, which is the wedding cake, which is, the fruit mince wedding cake, which is very, very high in sugar. You can keep that piece of wedding cake and still eat it for your 10-year wedding anniversary, because all it's done is you've increased the amount of sugar in it. So sugar is a food preservative which keeps its shelf life. So again, fruit now is pretty well manufactured to have low fibre and more sugar in it for its addictive behaviour, and it's actually profitability. But effectively, we don't really need it. There's again another talk of mine on YouTube called "Is Fruit Good or Bad for You?" And the story with that one is I was asked to go in a debate against a professor of nutrition who actually advises the Defence Forces here in Australia, and I somehow or other I fell into it, and then so that talk stems from that. And about halfway through my talk, he just conceded defeat. He said, "Okay, I get it. Fruit's not good for us." And so, but the argument here is fruit is nowhere near as good for us as it's advertised in the marketplace and in nature. Fruit in nature is. Have you ever worked out why fruit wants us to eat it?
Yeah, the fact that the seeds.
Yeah, that's
we take it in and spread the seeds.
Yeah, so it's a two-way street. We want fruit, so we get fat for winter. Fruit wants us to eat it, so we can propagate its seed. It hasn't worked out that we actually just propagate the seed into a ceramic porcelain bowl now, and it's not very effective. But but how does fruit market itself to us?
Color, smell, taste.
Yeah. And it's bright and shiny. Like it's like a Christmas bauble. It's there to attract your attention, so we eat and do its work. But the so and it markets and then the system, the marketplace now advertises it being rich in potassium and rich in in micronutrients and phytonutrients and everything underneath the sun. However, you get all of those in greater abundance from vegetables, which I'm having less of now. We can drift down that pathway later. But you get that from animal-based product. An animal-based product is going to be rich in the essential vitamins, the essential micronutrients, the essential mineral proteins, and the essential fats. And the animal-based product is very low in carbohydrate. And that's the way we evolved. We are here because we are we have a carnivore basis, and we are omnivores, I think, for survival. It's like we Our primary requirements are animal-based, but we will graze upon plant-based foods when we can't get our animal-based ones. So, we survive with a plant-based diet and we thrive on an animal-based diet. And that's, people think that's a controversial statement. No, it's frigging biochemistry. And that's all my arguments tend to be. This is biochemistry. I'm not making that stuff up. I mean, the Krebs cycle, which is a basic part of physiology, whether or not you're an animal or a human or an insect, is how we turn our food into energy, adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And we get it, and it can be done via protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And God's, whichever, God with a little g or a big G or whatever you believe in, God wasn't stupid enough to make us chemically dependent on a seasonal food source. God's given us the ability to actually utilize whatever is available in nature to give us energy to get from A to B. And that's called the Krebs cycle. The luxury item in that, the seasonally available ones, sugar and carbohydrate. But it comes at a price that it creates inflammation. The other thing about the seasonality and fructose, and again, it's in those talks with diagrams so people can understand it, is that fructose, the byproduct is that small dense LDL particle, which gets into the blood vessel wall. That is cleared by macrophages called foam cells to get them out of the wall, and they're under the direct influence of vitamin D. So guess when fruit's actually seasonally available? It's normally the end of summer, beginning of autumn. And so if you want to eat it at that point in time, there's generally an abundant amount of sunlight around. So you're going to have good amounts of vitamin D to actually get rid of the inflammation. We are not meant to be eating fructose in the middle of winter when we don't have sun. So our vitamin D levels drop down. So I think we get more inflamed through winter by eating sugar. And I don't know if that's a contributing cause to that, the winter blues. You've got them in Canada, similar latitude north as we are south. At the end of winter, everyone's got the blues. And is it because their vitamin D levels are down, or is it because their vitamin D levels are down and their inflammation levels are higher? I don't know. Again, these are just theories I bounce around.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Once you understand where the non-science is coming from, where the propaganda is coming from, and it is industry, pharmaceutical, and religious ideology, now I understand why I was conned in my medical education.